She's not supposed to be here. Madison Williams stared at the barefoot child standing in the center of his $40 million penthouse, filthy, trembling, covered in century-old dust, holding the key that had defeated 20 of the world's most elite treasure hunters. Her eyes locked onto his. One blue, one brown. And in that moment, everything he thought he knew about intelligence, worth, and visibility shattered. "If I'm smart enough to win your game," Danielle Kims whispered, her voice small but defiant, "why wasn't I smart enough to keep?" The room held its breath. No one understood what she meant. Not yet. They didn't know this 8-year-old had been living in the walls of Madison's building for 6 months, starving in the dark while billionaires celebrated genius above her head. They didn't know her mother had abandoned her at a bus station, screaming that her mismatched eyes made her cursed, unlovable wrong. Madison's annual challenge was supposed to be entertainment. A spectacle. A billion-dollar game that proved wealth could buy anything, even impossibility. But the girl with the demon eyes had just turned it into a reckoning. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever been overlooked because someone decided you weren't worth seeing? The 42nd floor of Madison Williams' downtown Seattle office building hummed with competitive tension. For 24 hours straight, the city's most expensive treasure hunters had transformed his $40 million penthouse into a war zone. Furniture lay disassembled across Italian marble floors. Original artwork had been removed from walls. Sections of hardwood flooring had been pried up. Thermal imaging cameras, metal detectors, and ground-penetrating radar equipment covered every surface like discarded toys. None of it had worked. Madison Williams, at 35, was a tech billionaire whose red hair and boyish charm masked a ruthless business mind. He'd built his fortune in cloud computing and quantum encryption, turning a Seattle startup into a global empire worth $8 billion. His annual challenge had become legendary in elite circles: hide a key somewhere in his fortress-like penthouse, give competitors 24 hours to find it, and whoever succeeded would walk away with $100 million. 5 years running, no one had won. This year's competitors represented the best of the best. Victor Strand, former Navy SEAL turned private security consultant. Dr. Patricia Reeves, MIT professor specializing in architectural analysis. James Blackwood, escape room designer who'd created puzzles for intelligence agencies. 18 others with equally impressive credentials, each convinced they'd be the first to crack Madison's challenge. They'd attacked the problem like a military operation. Divided into teams. Mapped every square inch of the 10,000 square foot space. Used equipment that cost more than most Americans would earn in a lifetime. They'd checked behind paintings, inside furniture, beneath floorboards, within ventilation systems. They'd scanned walls for hollow spaces, tested for hidden compartments, even examined the building's original architectural plans from the 1920s. Madison had watched it all from his study, sipping single malt scotch that cost $2,000 a bottle, amused by their systematic destruction of his carefully curated space. His challenge wasn't just about the money, though $100 million was a genuine prize. It was about proving that wealth could create mysteries even the smartest minds couldn't solve. But standing here now, staring at the small figure holding his key, Madison felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine shock. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle glittered in the late afternoon sun. The Space Needle pierced the skyline like a monument to innovation and progress. Below, the streets buzzed with tech workers heading to happy hours, tourists snapping photos, business executives closing million-dollar deals over expensive lunches. It was a city of opportunity, they said. A place where intelligence and hard work could transform anyone's life. But 30 stories below Madison's penthouse, in the shadows of those gleaming towers, another Seattle existed. One of tent cities under freeway overpasses. Of children sleeping in shelters that smelled like bleach and broken dreams. Of single mothers working 3 jobs and still choosing between rent and food. Of kids like Danielle Kims, who'd learned that intelligence meant nothing if you were the wrong kind of different. For 6 months, these two worlds had existed simultaneously in the same building, separated by marble, steel, and the profound blindness of privilege. Today, they collided. Danielle Kims had been 8 years old for exactly 3 weeks when her mother abandoned her at the Greyhound station downtown. The memory still played in her mind like a horror movie she couldn't stop watching. Her mother's hands shaking as she handed Danielle a garbage bag filled with clothes. The way she wouldn't make eye contact, as if looking directly at Danielle's mismatched eyes would turn her to stone. "Those eyes," her mother had whispered, her voice breaking. "Something's wrong with you, baby. I can't look at you anymore. People stare. They ask questions. They think you're possessed or cursed or... I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Then she'd walked away, disappearing into the crowd of travelers, leaving Danielle standing alone with her garbage bag and the certainty that she was fundamentally, irreparably broken. Heterochromia iridium, that's what the free clinic doctor had called it when Danielle was 5. A harmless genetic mutation that gave her one blue eye and one brown eye. Completely benign. Kind of beautiful, actually, the doctor had said. But in the struggling South Seattle neighborhood where Danielle's mother worked double shifts at a laundromat, different wasn't beautiful. It was dangerous. Other mothers pulled their children away from Danielle at the park. Church ladies whispered about demons and bad omens. Neighborhood kids called her witch eyes and devil girl. Her mother had tried, at first. Protected her. Defended her. But the constant judgment, the social isolation, the way people looked at them with suspicion and fear, it had worn her down like water-eroding stone. So at a Greyhound station on a Tuesday morning, she'd chosen her own survival over her daughter's. Danielle had spent 2 months on Seattle streets, learning to be invisible. She was too young for most shelters, which required parental consent. Too scared to talk to police, who'd send her back into a foster system that had already failed her 3 times. Too small to compete with adult homeless people for resources, but small enough to slip through cracks no one else could access. That's how she discovered Madison Williams' building. It had started with desperation. A December night so cold that Danielle's fingers had gone numb even inside her thin gloves. She'd watched well-dressed people entering the gleaming tower, noticed how the service entrance opened periodically when delivery trucks arrived, and made a split-second decision. Once inside, she discovered a hidden world. The building's guts, its maintenance tunnels, air shafts, forgotten storage rooms, and sealed-off spaces from decades of renovations, became her home. She learned to navigate through ventilation systems like a ghost. Found abandoned rooms where she could sleep, hidden from security cameras and human eyes. Discovered that corporate kitchens threw away more food than she could eat in a week. And she'd learned. Discarded business magazines became textbooks. Overheard conversations taught her about tech, finance, and the language of power. Late at night, she'd watch through air vents as Madison hosted board meetings, studied how he negotiated, how he commanded respect, how he wielded his intelligence like a weapon. Danielle had always been smart, scary smart, the way her second foster mother had described it. She taught herself to read at 4 by studying street signs and cereal boxes. Math came to her like breathing. Patterns emerged from chaos in ways that made sense only to her. But intelligence without opportunity was just another curse, like her eyes. Another thing that made her different, wrong too much. Until the day she'd crouched in an air duct above Madison's study and heard him announce his annual challenge. This year, Madison had declared to a room full of reporters and competitors, "I've hidden the key somewhere truly impossible to find. Not just in my penthouse, in the building itself. Somewhere that exists in the blueprints no one bothers to read. Somewhere only someone who truly understands this structure could access." He'd laughed then, that confident laugh of someone who believed money made him invincible. "Find the key in 24 hours, he'd continued, and $100 million is yours. Good luck finding something I don't want found." Danielle had felt something shift inside her chest. Because she knew something Madison Williams didn't. She knew this building better than anyone alive. Every hidden space. Every sealed door. Every forgotten renovation that created pockets of architecture that existed in photographs but disappeared from modern records. She knew about the 1920s Cornerstone Chamber, a ceremonial room created during the building's original construction, sealed off during a 1960s renovation, erased from current blueprints but still physically present in the building's foundation. She discovered it 3 months ago while exploring the subbasement, found the hidden access panel behind a false wall, and marked it in her mental map of survival spaces. If Madison had hidden his key somewhere truly impossible, somewhere that existed in old blueprints but not new ones, somewhere only someone who'd spent months living in the building's infrastructure would know, that's exactly where he'd put it. The competitors had started their search at 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Madison provided them with complete access to his penthouse, unlimited use of any equipment they wanted, and Permission to do whatever it takes short of structural damage that would compromise the building. They'd worked with military precision. Victor Strand's team focused on physical spaces, checking walls, floors, ceilings for hidden compartments. Dr. Reeves analyzed architectural plans, looking for discrepancies between original designs and current layouts. James Blackwood treated it like an elaborate puzzle, looking for patterns in Madison's previous challenges. By 6 p.m., they'd systematically cleared 80% of the penthouse. No key. No clues. No hidden safes or clever misdirection. By midnight, desperation had set in. Teams started double-checking each other's work. Arguments broke out about wasted time and missed details. Equipment malfunctioned. Tempers flared. By 6 a.m., with 3 hours remaining, the penthouse looked like a disaster zone. Madison's $40 million showcase of wealth and taste had been reduced to organized chaos. And through it all, Danielle had watched from the shadows. She'd studied their methods, learned their blind spots, and waited. Because she'd learned something crucial during her months of invisibility, adults rarely looked in places they didn't think mattered. They ignored service corridors, dismissed maintenance spaces, and never considered that the building's forgotten infrastructure might be more important than its polished facade. At 7:30 a.m., while competitors tore apart Madison's wine cellar looking for a hidden safe, Danielle had made her move. She descended through maintenance shafts that required crawling through spaces barely 2 feet wide. Used service ladders that hadn't been touched in decades. Navigated by memory through sub-basements so old they predated modern electrical systems. And she'd found the cornerstone chamber exactly where she remembered it. The room was small, maybe 10 feet square, filled with construction debris from the 1920s. Original tools. Hardened cement bags. Wooden beams with dates carved into them. And there, embedded in the building's original foundation stone, protected by a simple glass case, Madison's key. It wasn't elaborate. Wasn't high-tech. It was just a key, bronze and old-looking, placed in the one location no modern treasure hunter would think to check because it technically didn't exist anymore. Danielle had studied the case carefully. Unlike the high-tech security in Madison's penthouse, this was basic. Old-fashioned. A simple pressure alarm that would trigger if the case was lifted without being properly disarmed. But the wiring was ancient. Analog. Designed in an era before digital fail-safes. She'd learned about systems like this by watching YouTube videos on the public library computers. Had studied how buildings from the 1920s handled security. Had taught herself that sometimes the simplest solution was just careful, patient work. She didn't disarm the alarm. She just disconnected it. Wire by wire, using a paperclip she'd straightened into a makeshift tool. 10 minutes later, she'd held Madison's key in her hand. The hard part had been deciding whether to reveal herself. Danielle could have just left. Disappeared back into the walls. Let the billionaire and his competitors realize they'd failed again. She could have kept the key as proof that she existed, that she mattered, even if no one ever knew. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the memory of her mother's last words, "Something's wrong with you." Maybe it was 6 months of being invisible while brilliance and wealth celebrated themselves 30 stories above her head. Maybe it was the certainty that if she stayed hidden, nothing would ever change. She'd just be another ghost in the machine, another overlooked child whose intelligence died in the dark. Or maybe, after 8 years of being told she was cursed, wrong, too different to deserve love, Danielle just wanted someone to finally see her. So at 8:45 a.m., with 15 minutes left in Madison's challenge, Danielle had climbed back up through the building's infrastructure, emerged from a service corridor, and stepped into the penthouse. Into the light. Into the one moment that would change everything. But to understand why that moment mattered, why a barefoot 8-year-old holding a key could shatter a room full of powerful people, you need to understand where Danielle came from. You need to understand the mother who couldn't look at her own daughter's eyes. You need to understand the foster homes that treated her like a problem to be managed rather than a child to be loved. You need to understand the streets that taught her survival, but couldn't teach her why she wasn't worth keeping. Because Danielle Kims wasn't just a homeless child who found a key. She was a ghost who learned to see in the dark. A girl who taught herself genius in spaces society pretended didn't exist. A survivor who decided that being invisible was worse than being rejected. And when she asked Madison Williams, "If I'm smart enough to win your game, why wasn't I smart enough to keep?" She wasn't just asking him. She was asking America. 6 months earlier. The Greyhound station smelled like diesel fuel, stale coffee, and other people's desperation. Danielle sat on the hard plastic bench, her small legs dangling above the scuffed linoleum floor, clutching a black garbage bag that contained everything she owned. Her mother had told her to wait here. "I just need to use the bathroom, baby. Stay right here. Don't move. I'll be right back." That was at 9:47 a.m. Danielle knew because she'd watched the digital clock above the ticket counter change from 9:46 to 9:47, the moment her mother disappeared around the corner. Now it was 2:15 p.m. Danielle had stopped crying around noon. Crying attracted attention, and attention meant questions she didn't know how to answer. So she'd learned to sit very still, her mismatched eyes fixed on the bathroom entrance, willing her mother to reappear. Other travelers came and went. A businessman in a wrinkled suit glanced at her, frowned, then looked away. A college student with headphones walked past 3 times, each time slowing down as if considering whether to ask if she was okay, then deciding it wasn't her problem. An elderly woman stared at Danielle's eyes for a full 30 seconds before making the sign of the cross and hurrying away. That's when Danielle understood. Her mother wasn't coming back. She remembered the last real conversation they'd had, the night before. Her mother had been drinking the cheap vodka she bought at the corner store, the kind that came in plastic bottles. She'd been crying, mascara running down her cheeks like black rivers. "I can't do this anymore, Danny," she'd whispered, not looking at her daughter directly. Never looking directly. "Every time I look at you, those eyes. One blue, one brown. Like you're 2 different people. Like something went wrong when you were made. People talk. They stare. They ask me what's wrong with you, like you're broken, like I broke you. Mama, the doctor said it's normal." Normal. Her mother had laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "Nothing about you is normal, baby. And I can't keep pretending it is. I can't keep defending you, protecting you, explaining you. I'm tired, Danny. I'm so tired." Now, sitting in the Greyhound station with her garbage bag of clothes, Danielle understood what tired meant. It meant disposable. It meant not worth keeping. At 3:30 p.m., a security guard approached. He was older, maybe 50, with kind eyes that made Danielle want to trust him and run simultaneously. "Hey there, sweetheart. Where are your parents?" Danielle had prepared for this. She'd spent the last hour rehearsing the lie in her head. "My aunt is picking me up. She's just running late. Traffic." The guard studied her, doubt clear on his face. "How long you been waiting?" "Just like 20 minutes. The lie tasted bitter, but necessary. "What's your aunt's name? Maybe I can call her." Panic flashed through Danielle's chest. She grabbed her garbage bag and ran. Through the station. Past the ticket counter. Out into the Seattle afternoon where rain misted the streets and turned the world gray. She ran until her lungs burned, until the garbage bag split and clothes scattered across the sidewalk, until she collapsed in an alley behind a Chinese restaurant, gasping and alone. That night, she slept behind a dumpster. The second night, she found a doorway. The third night, she discovered that Seattle shelters required parental consent for children under 12, and calling the police meant foster care, and foster care meant being sent back into a system that had already failed her 3 times before her mother took her back. By the 4th night, Danielle had learned the most important survival rule: invisibility was safety. And by the end of the 2nd week, she'd found Madison Williams' building. 3 months into invisibility. The air ducts of the 42nd floor were Danielle's kingdom. At 3:17 a.m., she crawled through the ventilation shaft above the executive kitchen, her practiced movements silent as breath. Below, stainless steel counters gleamed under motion sensor lights. Yesterday's catered lunch sat in containers in the industrial refrigerator: grilled salmon, quinoa salad, artisan bread that cost more per loaf than Danielle used to spend on groceries for a week. She'd learned the patterns. Kitchen staff left at 6 p.m. Security did rounds at midnight, 3 a.m., and 6 a.m. Between 3:15 and 3:45 a.m., she had exactly 30 minutes. Danielle removed the vent cover with practiced efficiency, lowered herself down using a technique she taught herself by watching parkour videos on library computers, and hit the kitchen floor without a sound. 6 minutes to eat. 4 minutes to gather extra food. 2 minutes to clean up any evidence. 3 minutes to get back into the duct before security's 3:30 a.m. patrol. She ate quickly, mechanically, the way you eat when food is fuel rather than pleasure. The salmon was cold, but delicious. The bread still soft. She wrapped extra portions in napkins, tucked them into the oversized jacket she'd found in a building's lost and found, and was back in the air duct with 45 seconds to spare. Security guard Pete walked past below, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He yawned, checked his phone, moved on. He never looked up. Nobody ever looked up. That was the secret of invisibility. People only see what they expect to see. They expect homeless people to be on streets, in shelters, under bridges. They don't expect them to be living in the walls of billion-dollar office buildings, learning to navigate infrastructure that even maintenance workers had forgotten. Danielle's home, if you could call it that, was a sealed storage room on the 38th floor. It had been forgotten during a 1990s renovation, blocked off by a false wall that hid it from current floor plans. She discovered it by studying old building permits at the public library, then finding the access point through a maintenance shaft. Inside, a sleeping bag she'd salvaged from a dumpster, a battery-powered reading light from a dollar store, bought with quarters she'd collected from vending machine change slots, and a collection of discarded magazines and newspapers that became her textbooks. Fortune, Forbes, Wired, The Economist. She read everything. Business strategy, technology trends, investment theory. Words she had to look up using library computers became words she understood, then words she could use. Her vocabulary grew like a garden in concrete, unexpected, resilient, proof that intelligence doesn't need permission to exist. Some nights, she'd crawl through the air ducts to the 42nd floor and watch Madison Williams work. Through the vent grates, she'd observe board meetings, phone negotiations, strategic planning sessions. She learned how power sounded, how wealth moved, how men like Madison commanded rooms with confidence built on never being told no. She studied him the way a scientist studies a foreign species. And she learned that brilliance wasn't the same as wisdom. That intelligence without empathy was just performance. That Madison Williams could solve billion-dollar problems, but couldn't see the homeless child living in his building's walls. If you've ever felt invisible, like the world decided you didn't matter, you know what it's like to be Danielle. You know what it's like to be smart enough to survive, but not valuable enough to save. And if this story makes you feel something, maybe that's a reason to stay. Maybe that's why stories like this need to be told. Because somewhere right now, there's another Danielle. Another brilliant child that society has decided isn't worth seeing. And maybe, just maybe, if we tell these stories, we start to change what we choose to notice. The night before the challenge. Danielle was reading a 3-month-old copy of MIT Technology Review when she heard it. Through the air duct. Madison's voice, addressing someone in his study directly below her hiding spot. "This year's challenge is going to be different," he said, excitement clear in his tone. "I've hidden the key somewhere truly impossible. Not just in my penthouse, in the building itself. Somewhere that only someone who truly understands this structure could find." Danielle's heart stopped. She pressed her ear against the vent grate, barely breathing. "I found this old cornerstone chamber during my research," Madison continued. "From the 1920s. It's been sealed off for decades. Doesn't exist in any modern blueprints. The perfect hiding place. They'll tear my penthouse apart and never think to look in the building's foundation." He laughed. That confident, wealthy laugh of someone who believed money made him invincible. "Find the key in 24 hours, and $100 million is yours. Good luck finding something I don't want found." Danielle's breath came faster. The cornerstone chamber. She knew exactly where that was. She'd found it 3 months ago while exploring the subbasement, mapped it in her mind, marked it as a potential hiding place if security ever got too close to discovering her. Madison Williams thought he'd hidden his key in an impossible location. But he'd hidden it in the one place Danielle knew better than anyone alive. Her hands trembled as she clutched the magazine. For 6 months, she'd been invisible. A ghost. A child society had decided wasn't worth seeing. But what if she could do the impossible? What if she could prove that the girl with the wrong eyes, the girl her mother couldn't keep, the girl everyone overlooked, what if she could beat 20 elite professionals at a Billionaires game? What if she could force them to finally see her? The question kept her awake all night. And by morning, When Madison's competitors began arriving, Danielle had made her decision. She was going to step out of the shadows. She was going to find that key. And she was going to make Madison Williams answer the one question that had haunted her since her mother walked away. If I'm smart enough to win, why wasn't I smart enough to keep? Saturday morning, 9 a.m. The countdown began. 20 competitors flooded Madison's penthouse like an invading army. They came equipped with technology that looked like it belonged in spy movies. Thermal imaging cameras that could detect heat signatures behind walls, ground-penetrating radar that mapped density changes in floors and ceilings, spectral analyzers that identified different materials through solid surfaces. Victor Strand, the former Navy SEAL, had divided his team into tactical units. Alpha Team takes the North Wing. Beta Team, Master Suite and Study. Charlie Team, Kitchen and Service areas. I want every square inch mapped, measured, and cleared. We move systematically. No area gets checked twice until every area gets checked once. Dr. Patricia Reeves from MIT spread architectural blueprints across Madison's dining table, her team of graduate students surrounding her like disciples. Look for inconsistencies. Places where the spatial dimensions don't add up. He's an engineer, he thinks mathematically. The hiding place will have elegant logic. James Blackwood, the puzzle master, walked through the space slowly, touching walls, studying artwork, examining furniture joints. It's never about the technology, he told his partner. It's about psychology. What would Madison Williams find amusing? What would satisfy his ego? They tore into the penthouse with surgical precision. Paintings came off walls. Furniture was disassembled down to individual screws. Sections of crown molding were removed. They checked behind mirrors, inside light fixtures, beneath floorboards. Metal detectors swept every surface. Thermal cameras mapped temperature variations that might indicate hidden compartments. Madison watched it all from his study, a glass of Macallan 25 in hand, his green eyes bright with amusement. He'd set up monitors showing different angles of the destruction. Every few minutes, he'd chuckle at their increasingly desperate efforts. They're checking the wine cellar again, he told his assistant, shaking his head. Third time. As if I'd be that predictable. His phone buzzed with text messages from friends watching the live stream he'd set up for select viewers. Wealthy tech executives placing bets on who would give up first. Investment bankers making jokes about expensive failures. The annual challenge wasn't just entertainment, it was a social event among Seattle's elite. What none of them noticed was the small shadow moving through the ventilation system above their heads. Danielle had positioned herself in the main air duct that ran the length of the penthouse. From here, she could observe 4 different rooms simultaneously through vent grates. She'd been watching since 6 a.m., 2 hours before the official start, studying the competitors as they set up their equipment and planned their strategies. She noticed things they didn't. Victor's team moved with military efficiency, but they were conditioned to think about human-scale hiding places. They checked at eye level, at floor level, at ceiling level, but they never considered spaces too small for adults to access. Dr. Reeves' team trusted their blueprints completely. They measured, calculated, cross-referenced, but their blueprints only showed renovations from 1985 onward. Anything older had been lost in a records fire, and they didn't know what they didn't know. James Blackwood was the most dangerous. He moved intuitively, letting his mind wander through possibilities. Twice he'd stopped and stared at the ceiling, as if sensing something wrong. But each time, his partner had called him away to check another theory. By noon, they'd cleared 40% of the penthouse. No key. Growing frustration rippled through the teams. By 3 p.m., furniture lay in pieces across the floor. Wallpaper had been peeled back in sections. Floorboards were up in the master bedroom. Still nothing. By 6 p.m., Madison ordered catering brought in. Exhausted competitors ate gourmet sandwiches and drank energy drinks, their earlier confidence replaced by grim determination. And through it all, Danielle watched and learned and waited. She saw their fatal flaw around 7 p.m., when Dr. Reeves made an announcement that should have been a breakthrough but was actually a dead end. "I found a spatial anomaly," she declared, gathering everyone around her blueprints. "There's approximately 200 square feet unaccounted for between the penthouse and the floor below. A hidden room, maybe. We need to start drilling exploratory holes." The team surged with renewed energy. They marked the walls, calculated angles, prepared drilling equipment. But Danielle knew something they didn't. That 200-square-foot anomaly wasn't a hidden room. It was dead space created when the building was converted from apartments to offices in 1968. Just void. Empty cavity between floors, filled with old insulation and rat droppings. She'd crawled through it during her second month in the building. There was nothing there. They were going to waste hours chasing a ghost. And that's when it fully clicked for Danielle, the realization that made her chest tight with something between fear and exhilaration. Madison hadn't said, "in my penthouse." He'd said, "in the building itself." These competitors were limiting their search to the 42nd floor because that's what they'd been told. Find the key in Madison Williams' space. But Madison's space wasn't just his penthouse. He owned the entire building. Every floor. Every maintenance tunnel. Every forgotten corner from the 1920s construction. The cornerstone chamber flashed in her mind. That sealed room in the subbasement, 3 stories below ground level. Part of the original foundation work. Ceremonial space created when the building first opened, then sealed during renovations, erased from modern records but still physically present. A place that only someone who'd spent months exploring the building's hidden infrastructure would know existed. A place too small for most adults to access, requiring crawling through maintenance shafts and service tunnels that had been closed off for decades. A place where Madison could hide a key knowing that even if someone thought to search the entire building, they'd never find the entrance. Danielle's hands trembled as she watched the competitors drill into Dr. Reeves' spatial anomaly. She could wait. Let them fail. Let the 24 hours expire. Stay invisible and safe. Or she could move now. Navigate down through the building's infrastructure while the competitors destroyed Madison's penthouse. Reach the cornerstone chamber while they were distracted. Find the key before anyone realized the penthouse was a misdirection. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, "Something's wrong with you." Danielle closed her eyes and made her choice. At 7:45 p.m., while 20 elite competitors tore apart Madison's penthouse hunting for a key that wasn't there, an 8-year-old homeless girl with mismatched eyes began her descent through the building's forgotten passages. She had 12 hours until the deadline. And she was about to prove that the most dangerous thing society ever does is underestimate the intelligence of children it's decided don't matter. But there was one thing Danielle hadn't considered. One detail that would turn her careful plan into something far more dangerous than she'd imagined. Because in the subbasement, in that sealed cornerstone chamber where Madison had hidden his key, there was something else. Something the old building records mentioned in a single cryptic line that Danielle had read but not fully understood. Something that was about to wake up. The maintenance shaft behind the 39th floor utility closet was where Danielle began her descent. Most people would have needed a ladder. Danielle used the exposed pipes running vertically through the shaft, bracing her feet against opposite walls the way rock climbers navigate chimneys. Her small size was an advantage here. An adult would never fit through the 18-inch gap. She moved in darkness, her fingers reading the building's infrastructure like Braille. 6 months of living in these spaces had given her a mental map more accurate than any blueprint. Left pipe runs to electrical junction. Right pipe connects to water main. The gap between them narrows at the 37th floor. Squeeze sideways. Keep moving down. Her breath echoed in the confined space. Sweat made the metal pipes slippery. Once, her foot slipped, and for 3 terrible seconds she dangled by her fingertips, 20 stories of empty shaft below her. But she'd survived worse. Street life taught you that fear was just information, not instruction. At the 35th floor, the shaft intersected with an old service corridor. Danielle squeezed through a gap in the drywall, put there during a 1970s renovation and never properly sealed, and emerged into a hallway that smelled like dust and forgotten time. The corridor ran along the building's eastern edge, hidden behind the modern offices. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly yellow. Security cameras were mounted at both ends, but Danielle had studied their rotation patterns for months. 45 seconds between sweeps. She moved during the blind spot, pressed flat against the wall, and reached the service stairwell before the cameras rotated back. The stairwell descended past the lobby level, past the parking garage, down to subbasements that hadn't appeared on building directories in 30 years. Each level smelled older than the last. Concrete gave way to brick. Modern paint disappeared, revealing walls from the 1920s. The air grew thick with moisture and the organic smell of earth pressing against old foundations. At sublevel 3, the stairwell ended at a metal door marked Maintenance, authorized personnel only. The lock had rusted shut decades ago. Danielle had spent 2 weeks in March working it loose with oil she'd stolen from a custodian's cart. Now it opened with a push. Beyond, absolute darkness. Danielle pulled out her dollar store flashlight, batteries at 30%. She'd checked that morning. She couldn't afford to waste power. Quick sweeps to orient herself, then navigate by memory. The sub-basement was a maze of rooms that predated modern building codes. Boiler rooms from when the building used coal heat. Storage chambers filled with furniture from defunct businesses. Electrical boxes with ceramic fuses and cloth-wrapped wiring. And somewhere in this labyrinth, the cornerstone chamber. She found it behind what looked like a solid brick wall in the northeast corner. But if you knew where to press, a loose brick, 3rd row from the floor, 7 bricks from the edge, a section of the wall swung inward on concealed hinges. Someone in the 1920s had built a hidden door, and someone in the 1960s had forgotten it existed when they sealed this area off from the main basement. Danielle squeezed through. The cornerstone chamber was exactly as she remembered. 10 feet square, low ceiling supported by original support beams. The walls were brick, genuine 1920s craftsmanship. Construction debris covered the floor, rusted tools, cement bags hardened to stone, wooden forms stamped with dates. And there, mounted in the foundation stone itself, enclosed in a glass case that looked absurdly modern against the century-old masonry, Madison's key. Bronze, old-fashioned, deliberately theatrical. Madison had placed it like a museum exhibit, complete with small LED spotlights that activated when Danielle's flashlight beam crossed a motion sensor. But the key wasn't the only thing in the case. Wires. Circuit boards. A small LCD screen currently displaying, armed. Danielle's stomach dropped. Of course Madison had secured it. A key worth $100 million couldn't just sit in a glass case. She moved closer, studying the mechanism with a focused intensity that had let her teach herself programming from library computers. The alarm system was elegant in its simplicity. The glass case sat on a pressure plate. Lift the case without disarming the alarm, and the pressure change would trigger. What? A siren? A lockdown? A silent alert to Madison's security team? Any of those outcomes meant failure. Danielle examined the wiring, tracing connections with her eyes. And that's when she noticed something the professionals upstairs would have missed. The system was hybrid. Madison had installed modern components, the LED screen, the pressure sensor, the circuit boards, but he'd connected them to the building's original 1920s electrical system. The wires were cloth-wrapped copper, the kind that hadn't been used in construction for 70 years. The junction box was ceramic with screw-in fuses. Madison probably thought this was clever. Using antique infrastructure as part of the security. Very on theme for a cornerstone chamber. But Danielle had spent months studying this building's ancient electrical system. She knew its weaknesses. Cloth-wrapped wiring degraded over time. The insulation became brittle. The copper oxidized. Modern digital systems expected consistent power flow. Old wiring delivered inconsistent voltage, especially when you added load to the circuit. She couldn't disarm the alarm, that would require codes she didn't have. But she could overload the circuit. Danielle traced the wiring back to its junction box, mounted on the wall near the chamber entrance. Inside, 6 ceramic fuses, each rated for 15 amps. The alarm system was connected to fuse number 3. From her jacket pocket, Danielle pulled out a paperclip she'd been carrying for weeks. Street kids learned to keep useful things. She'd never imagined she'd use it to break into a billionaire's security system. She straightened the paperclip, then carefully, so carefully her hand shook, she bridged the connection across fuse number 3, bypassing it entirely. The junction box hummed. The lights flickered. The alarm's LCD screen glitched, numbers scrambling. Danielle held her breath. The pressure plate was still active, but now it was receiving inconsistent voltage. The alarm system was confused, caught between armed and disarmed states, unable to decide what signal to send. She had maybe 30 seconds before the system either reset or failed completely. Danielle moved to the glass case. Placed her hands on either side. Lifted straight up, spreading the weight evenly, minimizing the pressure change. The LCD screen flashed. Error. Error. System check. The glass case came free. No alarm. No siren. Just silence in a century-old chamber 3 stories underground. Danielle reached in and closed her fingers around Madison's key. It was warm. Heavier than she expected. Real. For 6 months, she'd been invisible. A ghost in the walls. A child society had decided wasn't worth seeing. Now she held proof that brilliance doesn't need permission. That intelligence exists in places wealthy people never think to look. She stood there in the darkness, clutching the key, and allowed herself one moment of pure, fierce triumph. Then she heard it. Above her. Through the building's infrastructure. The distinct sound of metal on metal. Heavy. Rhythmic. Getting closer. Someone else had found the sub-basement. And they were coming down the service stairwell toward the cornerstone chamber, moving fast, moving with purpose. Danielle's flashlight flickered, batteries at 15%, and in the dying light, she saw something she'd missed before. Scratched into the brick wall near the hidden door, barely visible under decades of dust. Cornerstone sealed 1962. Structural instability. Do not enter. The footsteps grew louder. Danielle clutched the key and ran. Danielle didn't stop running until she reached the 42nd floor. The footsteps in the sub-basement had belonged to a security guard doing rounds. Pete, she'd recognized his gait, but she couldn't risk being caught. Not when she was this close. She'd navigated back through the maintenance shafts, her flashlight dying completely on the 38th floor, climbing the final 4 stories in absolute darkness with the key clutched in her teeth because she needed both hands free. By the time she emerged from the ventilation system into the service corridor adjacent to Madison's penthouse, it was 8:47 a.m. Sunday morning. 23 hours and 47 minutes since the challenge began. 13 minutes until the deadline. Through the walls, she could hear voices. Exhausted. Defeated. Angry. Danielle pressed her ear against the service door and listened to her competitors destroy themselves. "We've checked everywhere," Victor Strand's voice, stripped of its earlier military confidence. "Every wall. Every floor. Every ceiling. Either the key isn't in this penthouse, or Williams has hidden it in a way that defies physics." The spatial anomaly was a dead end. Dr. Reeves sounded like she was on the verge of tears. Just void space. Insulation. Nothing. We wasted 4 hours drilling into nothing. He's playing us. James Blackwood's voice carried bitter recognition. This whole thing is theater. The key probably doesn't even exist. It's a psychological experiment about human determination and failure. Madison's laugh cut through their despair like a blade. "Gentlemen. Lady. You have," a pause, probably checking his watch, 12 minutes remaining. "I suggest you use them wisely." Though at this point, I'm not sure what wisely would even look like. The competitors had destroyed everything. Danielle could picture it without looking. Furniture in pieces, walls exposed down to the studs in places, floorboards up, ceiling tiles removed. 24 hours of systematic demolition by the world's best treasure hunters, and they'd found exactly nothing. Because they'd been looking in the wrong place. Danielle checked her reflection in the service corridor's grimy mirror. She looked like something dragged from a nightmare. Dust and cobwebs covered her clothes. Her face was smudged with dirt from the sub-basement. Her feet were bare and bleeding from climbing through the maintenance shafts. Her mismatched eyes, one blue, one brown, stared back at her with an intensity that made her look older than 8. She looked exactly like what she was, a homeless child who'd been living in the walls of a building where millionaires conducted business. For a moment, doubt crashed over her. What was she doing? She should disappear back into the ventilation system. Stay invisible. Stay safe. These people wouldn't understand. They'd call police, call social services, send her back into foster care or juvenile detention. They'd see her as a problem, not a person. But then she remembered her mother's last words. "Something's wrong with you." She remembered 6 months of being invisible while brilliance celebrated itself 30 stories above her head. She remembered teaching herself to read from discarded magazines because no one thought she deserved an education. And she remembered the question that had kept her awake every night since the Greyhound station. If she was smart enough to survive, why wasn't she smart enough to keep? Danielle gripped the key tighter. She pushed open the service door and stepped into the light. The penthouse looked like a war zone. 20 competitors stood among the wreckage of Madison's $40 million showcase, their expensive clothes rumpled, their faces exhausted and defeated. Madison himself stood near the windows, holding a glass of whiskey, preparing to deliver what was clearly going to be a mocking speech about their failure. Then he saw her. Everyone saw her. Movement from the service corridor. Small. Filthy. Impossible. Danielle walked into the center of the room, her bare feet silent on marble littered with destruction. She was shaking from exhaustion, from fear, from the weight of what she was about to do. Her stomach cramped with hunger she'd been ignoring for 2 days. Her legs trembled from the climb. But in her hand, held high enough for everyone to see, the key. Bronze. Theatrical. Unmistakably Madison's. The room didn't breathe. Victor Strand recovered first. Security breach. How did a child? Wait. Madison's voice cut through the shock. He set down his whiskey glass with a hand that wasn't quite steady. His green eyes fixed on Danielle with an expression somewhere between amazement and horror. How did you get in here? Danielle didn't answer. She just stared at him with her mismatched eyes, one blue, one brown, and watched him see her. Really see her. Maybe for the first time, someone was looking at her not as a problem to solve or a child to dismiss, but as an impossibility made flesh. That's the key. Dr. Reeves stepped forward, her scientific mind struggling with what her eyes were showing her. That's actually the key. But how, where? This is a setup. James Blackwood's voice carried outrage and accusation. Williams planted her. This whole thing is rigged. I've never seen this child in my life. Madison moved closer, studying Danielle like she was an equation that didn't balance. Who are you? Danielle opened her mouth. Closed it. Every word she'd rehearsed disappeared. Most people would look at Danielle and see exactly what the competitors were seeing, a problem. A complication. Something wrong and out of place. A homeless child who'd somehow infiltrated a Billionaire's challenge and ruined their chance at $100 million. But if you're still watching this story, maybe you see what Madison couldn't see yet. Maybe you see a girl who'd been teaching herself genius in spaces society pretended didn't exist. Maybe you see someone worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of person we need more of in the world. The kind who refuses to stay invisible. My name is Danielle Kims. Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder. I'm 8 years old. I found your key in the cornerstone chamber. Sub-basement 3. Behind the false wall. Where you said it would be. In the building itself. The room erupted. Competitors shouted over each other. Demanding explanations. Accusing Madison of cheating. Threatening lawsuits. Cameras that had been documenting the challenge swung toward Danielle, and she felt the weight of being seen after 6 months of invisibility. But Madison just stared at her. His face had gone pale beneath his tan. The cornerstone chamber, he said slowly. That room doesn't exist in any modern blueprint. How did you? I live here. The words came out flat. Factual. In your building. In the walls. I've been here 6 months. I know every maintenance shaft. Every sealed room. Every forgotten space. I know this building better than you do. Silence crashed over the penthouse like a physical weight. Madison's expression shifted from shock to something more complicated. Something that looked like recognition mixed with shame. You've been living in my building. For 6 months. And no one noticed. Danielle finished. Because no one looks. You walk past people like me every day and you don't see us. We're invisible. Except, she held up the key, I'm not invisible anymore. Victor Strand stepped forward, his military bearing returning. Sir, we need to call the authorities. This child is clearly homeless, possibly endangered. If I'm smart enough to win your game, Danielle's voice cut through the noise, stronger now, powered by 6 months of survival and a lifetime of being told she was wrong. Why wasn't I smart enough to keep? The question hung in the air like a confession. Madison Williams, tech billionaire worth $8 billion, man who commanded respect in boardrooms across 3 continents, stared at an 8-year-old homeless girl and had absolutely no answer. But before anyone could respond, Before Madison could ask what she meant, before the competitors could process what they were witnessing, the penthouse doors burst open. 2 uniformed police officers entered, followed by a woman in a gray suit carrying a Department of Child Services badge. "We received a call about a missing child in this building," the woman said, her eyes immediately finding Danielle. Danielle Kims. Age 8. Last seen 6 months ago at a downtown Greyhound station. Danielle's blood turned to ice. "There's a warrant for her placement," the woman continued. "Emergency protective custody." And she paused, looking at papers in her hand. A woman downstairs claiming to be her mother, requesting immediate reunification. The key slipped from Danielle's fingers and clattered against the marble floor. Her mother was here. "No." The word ripped from Danielle's throat before she could stop it. "No. She's not my mother. Not anymore." The CPS worker, her badge read Angela Torres, knelt down to Danielle's level with practiced sympathy that made Danielle's skin crawl. "Sweetie, I know this must be confusing and scary. But your mother has been looking for you. She's been worried sick. She made a mistake, but she wants to make it right. She called me cursed." Danielle's voice shook. "She said my eyes made me wrong. She left me at a bus station with a garbage bag and walked away. That's not worried. That's not a mistake. That's throwing me away." Madison finally found his voice. "Wait. Everyone stop." He stepped between Danielle and the CPS worker, his CEO authority snapping back into place. "This child just won my challenge. Legitimately won. Before we do anything else, that needs to be addressed. Sir, with all respect, child welfare takes precedence over a legally binding contract worth $100 million. Madison's lawyer had materialized from somewhere in the chaos, already on his phone. "Ms. Torres, I strongly suggest you pause until we've clarified the legal situation here." The penthouse descended into arguing voices. Competitors protesting that Danielle couldn't have won because she wasn't an official entrant. Madison's legal team insisting that the challenge rule stated anyone who finds the key wins with no age restrictions. The CPS worker demanding cooperation. The police officers looking increasingly uncomfortable with the whole situation. And through it all, news cameras rolled. Because of course they did. Madison's challenge was always meant to be entertainment. Spectacle. Content for his wealthy friends to consume. Except now the spectacle had a face. A small, dirty 8-year-old face with mismatched eyes that the cameras couldn't stop focusing on. Enough. Madison's voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone out. Competitors, police, press, everyone except my legal team and Ms. Torres. Now." Victor Strand started to protest. "We spent 24 hours. And you failed." Madison's tone left no room for argument. "The child found the key. Get out." It took 15 minutes to clear the room. Competitors left muttering about lawsuits. Camera crews were forcibly escorted out by security. Eventually, only Madison, his lawyer, Angela Torres, and Danielle remained in the destroyed penthouse. Madison turned to Danielle. "The challenge rules are clear. You found the key within the time limit. The prize is $100 million. My lawyer will begin processing the—" "I don't want your money." The words stopped Madison mid-sentence. "What?" Danielle looked at the key on the floor where she dropped it. She looked at the destroyed penthouse, at the wealth so casual it could be torn apart for entertainment. She looked at Madison Williams with his designer clothes and his $8 billion and his annual game that proved money could buy anything. And she felt nothing but exhaustion. "If I'm smart enough to win your game," Danielle said quietly, "why wasn't I smart enough to keep?" Silence filled the penthouse like a living thing. Madison's face showed confusion. "What do you mean?" "My mom." The words came slowly, painfully, like extracting splinters. "She left me at a Greyhound station 6 months ago. Told me to wait while she used the bathroom. She never came back. You know what her last words to me were? Those eyes. Something's wrong with you. I can't look at you anymore." Danielle pointed to her face, to the mismatched eyes that had haunted her entire life. One blue. One brown. Heterochromia iridium. That's the medical term. Completely harmless. But my mom couldn't handle how people stared. How they whispered. How they asked what was wrong with her daughter. So she threw me away. Angela Torres had gone very still, her professional sympathy replaced by something more genuine. Madison looked like he'd been struck. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. Danielle's voice carried no anger, just facts. I've been living in your building for 6 months. In the walls. In the maintenance shafts. In the forgotten spaces between your offices and your million-dollar penthouses. I taught myself to read using magazines your employees threw away. I survived on food from your corporate kitchens. I learned this building's architecture better than the people who designed it. And you never saw me. Not once. She took a step closer to Madison, her small frame dwarfed by his height, but her presence suddenly enormous. I solved your impossible puzzle. I found a key that defeated 20 professionals. I proved I'm smart enough, resourceful enough, brilliant enough to beat people with PhDs and military training and decades of experience. But none of that mattered when my mom looked at my eyes and decided I was broken. If I'm smart enough for you, if I'm valuable enough to win your game, why wasn't I smart enough to keep? The question landed like a physical blow. Madison Williams, who'd built an empire on intelligence and innovation, who'd spent his life celebrating genius and disruption, stared at a homeless child he'd never noticed and finally understood what his annual challenge really was. It wasn't about brilliance. It wasn't about problem-solving. It was about spectacle. Entertainment for the wealthy. A game that proved money could create mysteries, control outcomes, determine who mattered. And while he'd been hosting his billion-dollar performance, a child had been starving in his building's infrastructure, teaching herself genius in the dark spaces he pretended didn't exist. Your challenge, Danielle continued, her voice hollow with exhaustion, is obscene. You hide a key worth $100 million and watch people destroy themselves trying to find it. You turn intelligence into entertainment. You make brilliance perform for your amusement. And the whole time, children like me are invisible. Living in the walls. Starving. Surviving. And no one cares because we don't have the right parents or the right eyes or the right zip codes. Madison opened his mouth. Closed it. For the first time in his adult life, he had absolutely nothing to say. Angela Torres cleared her throat. Danielle, your mother is downstairs. She wants to. I don't care what she wants. Danielle's voice turned cold. She had 6 months to look for me. She didn't. Now that there's $100 million involved? Now she's worried? Now she wants her daughter back. The CPS worker's face showed she'd already reached the same conclusion. Madison finally found his voice. The money is yours. Legally. Ethically. You won it. I don't care what your mother. Keep your money. Danielle cut him off. I don't want it. What I want is an answer to my question. Not from my mother. From you. She stared at him with those mismatched eyes that society had decided made her wrong. If a child is smart enough to survive 6 months invisible in your building, if she's brilliant enough to solve a puzzle that defeated experts, if she's resourceful enough to teach herself genius from garbage, why does everyone keep deciding she's not worth keeping? Why am I only valuable now that there's money involved? Why do I only matter now that I've won your game? Before Madison could answer, the penthouse doors burst open again. Not police this time. Not CPS. A woman in her 30s, thin and desperate looking, her eyes red from crying, her hands shaking. Danielle's mother. And behind her, 2 men in expensive suits carrying briefcases, clearly lawyers she'd hired in the last 2 hours since news of the challenge broke. Baby. Her mother's voice cracked. Baby, I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. But I'm here now. I'm here to take you home. Danielle looked at the woman who'd abandoned her. Then at Madison, who'd never seen her. Then at the cameras that were somehow still recording through the windows from the building across the street. And she made a decision that would change everything. I'll take the money, Danielle said. All $100 million. But not for me. Everyone out. Madison's voice carried the authority of a man who'd built an empire by making decisions and expecting them to be followed. Now. Danielle's mother started to protest. I have a right to be present when. You have no rights here. Madison's lawyer stepped forward, his tone clinical. You abandoned your minor child 6 months ago. That constitutes neglect under Washington state law. Ms. Torres, I strongly suggest you remove this woman before we press charges. The mother's lawyers began shouting about parental rights and reunification protocols. Angela Torres looked torn between procedure and the obvious reality that this woman had only appeared after money became involved. The penthouse erupted into legal chaos. Madison raised his hand and the room went quiet. Money had that effect. Ms. Torres, you'll have your opportunity to follow proper channels. But right now, this child has legally won a prize, and I need to discuss the terms with her. Alone. Everyone else, out. It took another 10 minutes. Danielle's mother was escorted away, still crying, still apologizing to cameras that shouldn't have been there. The lawyers exchanged business cards and threats in equal measure. Angela Torres left reluctantly, promising to return with proper documentation. Then it was just Madison and Danielle in the destroyed penthouse. Madison sat on the floor, his expensive suit settling onto marble covered in dust and debris, and gestured for Danielle to sit across from him. Equal height. Equal eye level. Tell me everything, he said quietly. No lawyers. No cameras. Just you and me. Tell me how an 8-year-old girl ended up living in my building's walls. So Danielle told him. She told him about the Greyhound station. About her mother's shaking hands and final words. About the first night behind the dumpster when she'd cried so hard she threw up. About learning to be invisible because visibility meant questions, and questions meant foster care, and foster care meant being sent back into a system that had already failed her 3 times. She told him about discovering his building. About finding the maintenance tunnels and learning to navigate them. About the subbasement with its forgotten rooms and century-old architecture. About teaching herself to read using copies of Fortune and Wired that his executives threw away after 5-minute bathroom breaks. I learned about your company from your own trash, she said. Articles about your quantum encryption patents. Profiles about your rise in tech. I taught myself programming basics from discarded computer magazines. I studied you through air vents while you held board meetings, watching how you negotiated, how you commanded rooms. Madison's face had gone pale. 6 months. You've been here 6 months. 173 days, Danielle corrected. I counted. Every morning I woke up in that sealed storage room on the 38th floor. I made a mark on the wall with a piece of charcoal I found in the subbasement. 173 marks. 173 days of being invisible in a building where people make millions deciding what matters. God. Madison put his head in his hands. I walked past you. I must have walked past you. How many times did I? You never saw me, Danielle said simply. No one did. That's what homeless children learn first. Adults only see what they expect to see. They expect homeless people to be on streets, in shelters, under bridges. They don't expect them to be living in the infrastructure of buildings where billion-dollar deals happen. So we become ghosts. Madison looked up at her, and Danielle saw something she hadn't expected, genuine shame. I built my entire empire on finding inefficiencies, he said slowly. On seeing problems others miss. On solving what everyone says can't be solved. And I missed a child starving in my own building. You missed hundreds of children, Danielle corrected. I'm not special. There are kids living in subway tunnels, abandoned buildings, parking garages all over Seattle. Kids who are brilliant and resourceful and overlooked. Kids teaching themselves survival in spaces society pretends don't exist. You didn't just miss me. You miss all of us. Everyone does. The weight of that truth settled over the penthouse like snow. Madison was quiet for a long moment. Then, what do you want, Danielle? Really want? Not the money. You said you'd take it, but not for yourself. So what do you want? Danielle met his eyes, her mismatched blue and brown against his green, and asked the question that had haunted her since the Greyhound station. I want to know if I'm worth anything. Madison started to answer immediately, but Danielle held up her hand. Don't, she said. Don't tell me yes because you feel guilty or because cameras are watching or because it's the right thing to say. Don't lie to me the way adults have been lying to me my whole life. If I'm worth something, prove it. How? Madison's voice was barely a whisper. Use the money. All of it. To find kids like me. Not after we're dead. Not after we've been failed by every system that's supposed to protect us. Before. When we still have a chance. Build something that looks in the places you ignored. That sees the children you walked past. That recognizes intelligence in spaces where wealth assumes nothing valuable exists. Madison nodded slowly. A foundation. Programs in shelters, juvenile facilities, failing schools. I can do that. I will do that. And I want to be part of it, Danielle continued. Not your charity case. Not your poster child. Not the sad story you trot out at fundraisers. Your partner. Madison blinked. You're 8 years old. I'm 8 years old and I lived in your building for 6 months without you knowing. I taught myself programming and architecture and how to survive on 3 hours of sleep and scavenged food. I solved a puzzle that defeated 20 professionals. I negotiated building infrastructure better than your own maintenance staff. So don't tell me what I can't do because of my age. Tell me if you're brave enough to work with someone who sees what you missed. Madison Williams, tech billionaire and CEO, stared at an 8-year-old homeless girl and realized she was absolutely right. Partners, he said, extending his hand. Danielle shook it. Her small hand in his large one. A deal worth more than money. We start tomorrow, she said. Today, I need food and sleep. Real food. Real sleep. Not scavenged food and sleep in a sealed room with rats. Madison started to stand, to call his assistant, to arrange everything. The penthouse doors exploded inward. Not police this time. Not CPS. Not Danielle's mother. FBI agents. 6 of them, weapons drawn, faces grim. Madison Williams, you're under arrest for child endangerment and conspiracy to defraud. Danielle Kims, you're being placed in federal protective custody pending investigation of organized fraud. The lead agent held up a tablet showing security footage. Time-stamped. Dated. Showing Madison and Danielle in conversation 3 months ago in the subbasement. Showing Madison handing her something. Showing what looked like planning, coordination, conspiracy. Footage that couldn't exist because Madison and Danielle had never met before today. Footage that had been manufactured. Madison's face went from confusion to fury to horror in 3 seconds. Someone had framed them. Someone with access to building security systems, video editing technology, and FBI connections. Someone who wanted to destroy them both before their partnership could begin. And as FBI agents moved to separate them, as Madison's lawyers started shouting, as Danielle felt handcuffs close around her small wrists for the first time in her life, she looked at Madison and saw the same realization in his eyes. Their game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The manufactured footage fell apart in 48 hours. Madison's cybersecurity team traced the digital fingerprints back to a disgruntled former competitor, Victor Strand, the Navy SEAL who'd spent 24 hours destroying Madison's penthouse and losing. He'd hired a tech firm to fabricate the security footage, hoping to invalidate Danielle's win and force a rematch. The FBI dropped all charges and issued a public apology that meant nothing to Danielle, who'd spent 2 nights in a juvenile detention facility being processed, questioned, and treated like a criminal. But the damage was done. The story had gone viral. Not the heartwarming version Madison's PR team wanted, the ugly version. Headlines screamed about homeless children, billionaire games, and manufactured crises. Cable news debated whether Madison had exploited Danielle or saved her. Social media turned her into a meme, her mismatched eyes photoshopped onto everything from political cartoons to cryptocurrency scams. Danielle learned something crucial during those 48 hours. Visibility was a weapon. And it cut both ways. 3 months later, on a Tuesday morning in March, the Danielle Initiative officially launched at a press conference in downtown Seattle. The venue was deliberately chosen, not Madison's gleaming headquarters, but a community center in South Seattle where Danielle's mother used to work. Where kids still played basketball on cracked courts and attended after-school programs in rooms that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams. Danielle stood at the podium wearing clothes that actually fit, jeans, sneakers, a blue hoodie that matched one of her eyes, and faced 200 people who'd come to judge whether an 8-year-old and a billionaire could actually change anything. Most people think homelessness looks like someone sleeping on a sidewalk, Danielle began, her voice amplified by microphones that made her sound older than her years. But I lived in a 40-story office building for 6 months and no one noticed. There are brilliant children surviving in places you walk past every day. In maintenance tunnels. In abandoned buildings. In cars parked outside their former schools. They're teaching themselves genius from garbage and discarded opportunities. She paused, scanning the audience. Reporters. Policymakers. Social workers. Skeptics. The Danielle Initiative isn't charity. It's infrastructure. We're not giving handouts. We're building systems that look in the places society ignores. That recognize intelligence doesn't need permission or the right zip code to exist. That understand brilliance is everywhere, opportunity is not. Madison stood off to the side, letting Danielle control the narrative. That had been part of their agreement. She wasn't his project. She was his partner. The program was ambitious. 20 cities. Embedded counselors in juvenile facilities and homeless shelters. Partnerships with public libraries to provide technology access. Scholarships not based on grades, because kids living in cars don't have stable GPAs, but on demonstrated resourcefulness, problem-solving, and potential. And at the center, Danielle herself. Not as a victim to be pitied, but as a strategist who understood the systems she was challenging. Over the next 3 months, she became a voice no one could ignore. She spoke at education conferences, telling rooms full of administrators that their systems were designed to miss children like her. She met with policymakers, explaining why traditional metrics of at-risk youth failed to identify the brilliant kids surviving in invisibility. She challenged juvenile facility directors who treated detention as punishment rather than opportunity. Her mismatched eyes, the feature her mother had called cursed, became her signature. News profiles focused on them. Magazine covers photographed them in dramatic close-ups. One blue, one brown. A visual reminder that different wasn't wrong. It was just different. Madison kept his promise. His annual challenge transformed into the Invisible Genius Scholarship, a nationwide competition where kids from shelters, foster care, and failing schools competed to solve real-world problems. The prize: full college scholarships and mentorship programs. The $100 million Danielle had won became seed funding for programs in 40 states. But it wasn't clean. It was never going to be clean. Media outlets couldn't resist the story but couldn't tell it right. They exploited Danielle's trauma, running headlines like "Abandoned Girl Becomes Millionaire," without understanding she'd given away the money. They published photos of the Greyhound station where her mother had left her, turning her worst moment into clickbait. Think pieces appeared questioning Madison's motives. Was this genuine change or performative activism? Was he using Danielle's story to rehabilitate his image as a billionaire who'd been too blind to see suffering in his own building? Some called Danielle a diversity prop. Others accused her of being coached, scripted, manufactured. Conservative pundits claimed she was being exploited by liberals. Liberal commentators worried she was being used to justify cutting social services. Everyone had an opinion about what Danielle represented. No one asked what she actually wanted. The cruelty came from unexpected places. Other homeless advocates accused her of being an exception, not a rule, arguing that highlighting one brilliant child made it harder for normal homeless kids to get help. Parents of children in foster care resented the attention she received when their kids struggled in obscurity. And the hate mail. God, the hate mail. Letters calling her eyes demonic. Messages saying her mother was right to abandon her. Death threats from people who thought an 8-year-old challenging the system was somehow more dangerous than the system itself. Danielle read every piece of hate mail. Studied it. Learned from it. Because she understood something her critics didn't. Visibility was the price of refusing to disappear. And she'd spent 6 months invisible. She knew which was worse. On a Friday afternoon in June, Danielle sat in the initiative's headquarters, a renovated building 3 blocks from where she used to sleep behind dumpsters, and reviewed applications from the first month of operation. 347 children identified. Kids living in cars who taught themselves coding on library computers. Teenagers in juvenile detention who designed inventions using contraband materials. Foster kids who'd memorized entire textbooks because they never knew when they'd have to change schools. Every application was a reminder that she wasn't special. She was just visible. Her phone buzzed. Madison calling. "Turn on the news," he said, his voice tight. Danielle grabbed the remote and switched to CNN. Breaking news. A congressional investigation had been launched. Not into homeless children or failing systems. Into the Danielle Initiative itself. Representative Douglas Hartley, conservative, wealthy, powerful, stood at a press conference declaring that Madison Williams had manufactured a crisis and that Danielle Kims was a coached performer exploiting taxpayer sympathy. He demanded a full audit of the initiative's finances and questioned whether Danielle was even legally allowed to be involved in a nonprofit at her age. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the woman standing next to Representative Hartley. Danielle's mother. Freshly styled hair. New clothes. Tears streaming down her face as she spoke into microphones about how her daughter had been stolen by a billionaire with an agenda. How she'd made a mistake 6 months ago but was trying to make it right. How Madison had poisoned Danielle against her own family. "I want my daughter back," her mother sobbed for the cameras. "I want to protect her from people using her pain for profit." Danielle's hands went numb. The remote clattered to the floor. "Danielle." Madison's voice from the phone. "Are you there?" She couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. Because she understood exactly what was happening. Her mother had found new lawyers. Better lawyers. Lawyers connected to powerful people who wanted to destroy the initiative before it could expose how many brilliant children the system was failing. This wasn't about reunification. This was about control. And standing behind her mother, barely visible in the camera frame, was a face Danielle recognized from Madison's building. Victor Strand. The former Navy SEAL who'd manufactured evidence. Who'd been arrested and released on bail. He was smiling. The congressional investigation lasted 8 months. Victor Strand and Danielle's mother had orchestrated it perfectly. Manufacturing doubt, exploiting legal technicalities, using media connections to paint Madison as a billionaire with a savior complex and Danielle as a coached victim. They demanded custody hearings, financial audits, and testimony that forced Danielle to relive her abandonment in front of cameras and hostile lawyers. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated what happens when you try to make invisible children disappear again. The first letter came from a 14-year-old in Atlanta named Marcus. No, wait, I can't use Marcus. The first letter came from a 14-year-old in Atlanta named Terrence who'd been living in his family's car for 2 years. He'd taught himself app development using a cracked phone and library Wi-Fi. His letter to the congressional committee was 3 pages of code demonstrating a peer support system for kids in crisis, ending with, "If you shut down the initiative, you're telling me I should have stayed invisible. I refuse." Then came letters from 60 other children. Then 300. Then thousands. Kids who'd been found by the initiative. Kids still waiting to be found. Kids who saw Danielle's story and recognized themselves, not in the triumph, but in the invisibility that came before it. The congressional investigation collapsed under the weight of voices that refused to be silent. Victor Strand was convicted of conspiracy and witness tampering. Danielle's mother lost her custody case when it emerged she'd been paid $50,000 to participate in the scheme. She disappeared from public life, leaving behind only a single letter Danielle never opened. 2 years later, on a cold morning in November, Danielle Kims stood in the United Nations Assembly Hall in New York and told her story one more time. She was 10 now. Taller. Still too thin, but healthy. Her mismatched eyes had become internationally recognized. One blue, one brown, staring out from magazine covers and conference posters. The girl who'd lived in the walls had become the girl who refused to let anyone else stay hidden. The Danielle Initiative has identified 347 children in 2 years, she said, her voice steady and clear in the vast chamber. Not 347 sad stories. 347 prodigies who were surviving in places you trained yourself not to see. She gestured to the screen behind her, where faces appeared. Children of every background, every age, every circumstance. Keisha Williams, 12, from Detroit. She designed a water purification system using materials from a junkyard because her shelter's water made kids sick. Her invention now provides clean water to 6 Detroit shelters and is being tested in 3 other cities. Another face appeared. A small boy with serious eyes. Tomas Rivera, 9, from Houston. He taught himself coding from a computer magazine he found in a recycling bin. He wrote an algorithm that detects early signs of sepsis, blood poisoning, in patients. It's currently being reviewed by the Mayo Clinic. Tomas wrote it while living in a car with his mother and 2 sisters. More faces. More stories. A 14-year-old who created a peer support app for kids in crisis. An 11-year-old who developed a new approach to teaching math to kids with unstable housing. A 13-year-old who designed a portable power system for people living without electricity. These children didn't need permission to be brilliant, Danielle continued. They didn't need the right schools or the right families or the right zip codes. They just needed someone to look. To actually look at the places we pretend don't exist. She paused, scanning the assembly. Delegates from 100 nations. Policymakers. Child welfare experts. People with the power to change systems that failed children like her every single day. I found Madison Williams' key because I lived in the places he walked past without seeing. I survived in infrastructure he owned but never noticed. I taught myself genius from his garbage. And when I finally stepped into the light, holding proof that brilliance exists everywhere, do you know what happened? The assembly was silent. People tried to make me disappear again. They called me a fraud. A prop. A coached performer. They said I was the exception, not the rule. That highlighting my story would hurt normal homeless kids. They did everything possible to avoid confronting the truth I represented. Danielle's voice grew stronger. The truth is this: there are children living in the walls of your cities right now. In subway tunnels and abandoned buildings and parking garages. Children teaching themselves survival and genius simultaneously. Children who are brilliant and overlooked and invisible because you've decided they don't exist in places that matter. She leaned forward, her mismatched eyes seeming to make direct contact with every person in the room. I found the key because I lived in the places you pretend don't exist. So here's my question for you. How many other keys are you missing because you refuse to look? How many other Keishas and Tomases and Terrences are solving problems you pay millions to address, but you'll never know because they're surviving in spaces you've trained yourself not to see? The assembly erupted in applause, but Danielle wasn't finished. Brilliance doesn't live where you expect. Intelligence doesn't need permission. Genius doesn't wait for the right circumstances. But opportunity only exists where people choose to look. So choose better. Look harder. See the children you walk past. Because we're not invisible anymore. And we refuse to let you forget we exist. Madison Williams watched from the audience, tears streaming down his face. He thought about the child who'd stood in his penthouse 2 years ago, barefoot, starving, holding a key that had exposed everything he didn't want to see. He thought about the 6 months she'd lived in his building while he'd hosted parties and closed deals and never once looked at the infrastructure that made his empire possible. He thought about the real prize. Not the key. Not the challenge. Not even the initiative itself. The real prize was learning to see. Because Danielle's story isn't about one child. It's about the thousands of children we walk past every day, the brilliant, the overlooked, the ones we've decided don't matter because they don't fit our narrow definition of where intelligence lives. If this story changed how you see the world, even a little, maybe it's worth remembering. Maybe it's worth sharing. Maybe it's worth making sure we stop pretending they don't exist. Because right now, there's another Danielle living in the walls of a building you own or work in or walk past. And the question isn't whether she's brilliant enough. The question is whether you're brave enough to look. 3 months after the UN speech, Madison received an envelope. No return address. Postmarked from Seattle. Inside, a single photograph. It showed the cornerstone chamber in his building's subbasement. The place where Danielle had found his key 2 years ago. But the image wasn't from 2 years ago. It was dated 3 days ago. The timestamp was clear. And in the photograph, standing exactly where Danielle had stood, holding something that gleamed in the LED lighting. Another child. Different face. Different age. Different circumstances. Same invisible brilliance. Same message: we're still here. We're still watching. We're still waiting to be seen. Madison stared at the photograph and realized with absolute certainty. The game was never over. It was never supposed to be. Danielle's story isn't about one child. It's about the thousands of children we walk past every day, the brilliant, the overlooked, the ones we've decided don't matter. If this story changed how you see the world, even a little, maybe it's worth remembering. Maybe it's worth sharing. maybe it's worth making sure we stop pretending they don't exist.